with that, what is geothermal? So geothermal, or some of you may know, ground source heat pumps, is a high performance all electric space conditioning system that's critical for electrifying our heating systems. So geothermal are ground source heat pumps. They do not generate heat themselves, but instead they use a source, so in this instance, the ground, to draw heat from the Earth's surface and use that heat that's drawn from the Earth's surface in an exchange loop, plus a heat pump to heat and or cool the conditioned space, which would be your apartments, your house, whatever that space would be. Geothermal can reduce energy consumption up to 44% when compared with air source heat pumps, and up to 72% when compared with electric resistance heating with standard air conditioning equipment. Um, and also, one thing that's really cool about heat pumps or ground source heat pumps or geothermal is that you can also tie in your domestic hot water system for hot water heating. So a multifaceted system, which is really cool, really awesome, and it is possible in New York City. So why would we even consider using geothermal for affordable housing? Well, some of those awesome factors that I mentioned is there's a great potential for reduction in utility expenses. They're higher in energy efficiency. They provide dual heating and cooling, and then also that added benefit of tying in your domestic hot water system. There are a plethora of tax incentives, which we'll get into later on in this presentation, which makes geothermal extremely financially feasible. Geothermal can withstand cold climates, which makes it a resilient system. Um, there's, again, that reduction in carbon emissions, as well as it being a reliable energy source because geothermal is a renewable resource. And then last but not least, there's no equipment on your roof, so that frees up your roof space for things like solar, green roofs, or even recreation space for tenants. So with that brief introduction, I will pass it over to our experts to really get into the nitty-gritty about geothermal and what that looks like in the New York City market. And we will begin with Sara Levenson from L&M.
Thanks, Jasmine. Good morning, everyone. Apologies, I'm recovering from the latest plague that was going around, so I'm sounding a little bit scratchy today. But I'm the project lead on our Verniste and the Beach Green Dunes projects. Beach Green Dunes was L&M's first geothermal project and first passive house project throughout our portfolio. So I'm excited to give you a little bit of a case study of what we've been doing out in the Rockaways and our trajectory with geothermal as a company overall. Next slide, please, Jasmine. So this is the Beach Green Dunes project in our Verniste at about 30,000 feet. The project overall is 116 acres beachfront in the Rockaways and the Edgemere and Arverne communities. The Beach Green Dunes projects are out parcels for the larger development site, but really what we've been doing as a team is leveraging the out parcels in Beach Green Dunes 2 as testing grounds for our energy efficiency and resiliency methodologies that we are implementing on the development site on a much larger scale. Next slide. Thanks. So I'm starting with Beach Green 2, but I think people will wonder, well, what about Beach Green 1? So I went back to our partners and asked, why didn't we do geothermal on Beach Green 1? And I think the response was, well, it wasn't necessarily considered in design in 2012 and 2013, which is really interesting because I think at the time when we did Beach Green 2, and Zach can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure we were either the largest or one of the largest affordable housing projects using geothermal or going to implement geothermal. So the system or the methodology was still fairly new when we were endeavoring on this design and implementation. And much to Jasmine's point on Beach Green 2, we used the geothermal system for heating and cooling. We did not put the domestic hot water on the service. I think we were, this being our first go, we're a little bit nervous about putting domestic hot water on the system and seeing how it would perform in cold temperatures during the winter. But that you'll see in future phases. Certainly, we pivoted pretty quickly after seeing how Beach Green 2 performs. But this was a closed loop, or is a closed loop system. It provides building heating and cooling. The bore fields are located in our rear yard, and we leveraged our surface parking lot as well. And also, as Jasmine had noted in her opening introduction, we were also leveraging our roof for solar generation, and also coupled the Geo with Passive House certification as well. Next slide, please. With Beach Green Dunes 3, which we closed on financing with HPD and HDC at the end of last year. So it's currently in construction and anticipated to TCO at the end of this year. We went all in on a full electric building here. The Geo is providing heating, cooling, and domestic hot water support. The well field is located not only in a public plaza to the front of the building, but also underneath the building footprint. We also added additional equipment like a heat exchanger, which is beneficial for maintenance, enhanced controls as well, which really helps on the ownership side and the maintenance side maintain well field balance. This project also has ample solar on the roof and will be going after a FIA certification as well. Next slide, Jasmine. Pivoting to the larger Arvernese development site, the first assets were placed in service this past year, including a 35-acre nature preserve and our Welcome Center. The Welcome Center is a 100% electric building. It provides community assets such as a public restroom, a community room for community groups to leverage and use, and also a permanent home for the New York City Urban Park Ranger Command. We have a closed loop geothermal system here that is providing heating and cooling in the building, a pretty sophisticated BMS to monitor system performance. And also what's special about this project is we're also leveraging the building and its programming and the Geo for public educational tools. So we have a sustainability wall as part of the building, so visitors can actually see data points on how the geothermal is performing and other sustainability assets throughout the project. So really putting geothermal on display for the public. Next slide, please. Looking at the development site for Arvern East, the ultimate build will be 1,650 units of housing and several 100,000 square feet of non-residential space. And when looking with our designers and our consultants and engineers about the best execution for Geo here, they suggested a district geothermal system. Next slide, please. What a district means is all of the projects throughout the larger development will be connected, and we're leveraging our building's various uses and thermal profiles to maximize efficiency and thermal sharing. Because we have such ample open space here, we're also able to leverage bore field locations outside of building footprints. There is an advanced design for controls for maximum efficiency and information, and the district and its equipment is anticipated to be privately owned. Next slide, please. So just digging into the financing at a very high level, these are conceptual cap stacks representing the three assets that we have placed in service in the Rockaways currently. The Beach Green Dunes 2 and 3 projects, for all those who are familiar with affordable housing finance, should look very familiar. I think the difference here is really how we leveraged the investment tax credit. There was a change in the program structure in 2022. So Beach Green 2 took advantage of the older investment tax credit program, where Beach Green 3 was able to take advantage of the new IRA, which has much more robust incentives for the implementation of not just geothermal, but other clean energy methodologies as well. So on Beach Green 3, in addition to the base credit, we're going after a domestic content boost and additional boosts for being a low-income housing project. And pivoting to our Welcome Center, which was primarily financed through housing infrastructure dollars through HPD, because the building is a 501c3 owned building, we're able to take advantage of a new portion of the IRA, which is a direct pay rebate, which will establish effectively a reserve for the operation of the building moving forward. Next slide. So really, this is just to communicate that there are a variety of options that are open to developers when looking to finance a geothermal system, in addition to your bread and butter sources. At any given time, there are opportunities through NYSERDA, DOE, utility rebates, and there are even some technical design support opportunities that are available. Next slide. So this just kind of gets to a little bit more granularity as to what is currently available today. Definitely do not take it as gospel, but just some options from NYSERDA's Building of Excellence program that really supports cutting edge energy efficient buildings. There are grants and rebates through DOE. You can go to their website at any given time. They can tell you not only what they have currently open, but you can take a look at what was historically provided as well. And I anticipate with the IRA, there will be more opportunities coming down the pike in the future. The utility companies also have programs and incentives. There's a Con Ed Clean Heat program, which I believe is currently in place through 2025. NYSERDA has the Flex Tech program, which provides technical assistance on the design side as you're getting started. PSE&G has an analogous technical assistance program and also has rebates as well for the application of geothermal throughout your projects. And just generally speaking from a cost perspective, when looking at construction, I think you heard me say a lot of where the bore fields were located, whether they were under the building or not. From a cost perspective, when handling your geo, there's usually a little bit longer, probably 6 to 8 weeks, depending on the system and building design that you're needed in construction to drill the bore fields, which will usually add a little bit of an extra cost from an interest carry perspective and schedule perspective during construction. Definitely check with your tax professionals, but we've been advised that these interest carry costs associated with the GEO are basis eligible for the ITC credit boost. And so I think just, taking that into consideration when planning out your construction schedules and costing is always a good thing to keep in mind. And just from a portfolio perspective, we have expanded the application of our geothermal across our portfolio. I think now we have about 5 projects or 475 units placed in service. We have about 900 units in construction now, and a couple thousand that are either in design or pipeline that we're anticipating to implement geothermal on in the future. And every time we are looking at a new project or a new deal, we do always evaluate it, whether or not it would be a good deal for geo. So I strongly recommend everyone to give it a shot. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I will now pass it over to Zach for the next segment of this training.
Yeah, all right. So I'm Zach Fink, ZBF Geothermal, and we'll jump into geothermal in New York City. So as Sara mentioned, Beach Green Dunes 2 was, to my knowledge, the first closed loop geothermal building in New York City. We all thought, Dave was involved in it. There's a lot of us on this call that was involved in it. We all thought they were a little crazy when they called and said, we want to do geothermal for a multifamily building. And Jasmine, if you go to the next slide. There wasn't a great domestic hot water system out at the time. So the photo on the left is kind of for the next phase of an L&M building, where we had to design our own domestic hot water system because there wasn't a pre-manufactured solution on the market. Now I can name probably 10 or 15 different manufactured solutions on the market. By 2020, which is just a few years ago, there wasn't a great solution that can maintain 140 degrees at all times. So we sat down with every heat pump manufacturer and we came up with a solution. So this is just kind of some components that you'll see. You'll see domestic hot water heat pumps, you'll see a geothermal manifold, and you'll see some building pumps. Everyone always wants to see the geothermal system, but you really don't see anything after the systems are installed, which is kind of the beauty of it. So next slide. So just to give a point, these are the projects that I have visibility into. I'm sure there's more, but I know of 25 plus, closed loop geothermal apartment buildings that are either operational, under design, and in construction. We have about 5,000 apartments that are in various stages of design, construction, and operation at this point. And we're almost doubling year over year. So it's an amazing, amount of momentum that we're seeing. Next slide, please. So there's some big, noticeable projects that are kind of in the marketplace right now. 1515 Surf Coney Island, which is a 16 to 26 story building that is operational, and the 421A units will be occupied shortly. One Java in Greenpoint, which is 37 stories, is under construction. Arvern East is in design. Beach Greens Dunes 2 and 3 are one's operational, one's under construction. Marcus Garvey, half of the units are operational, the other units are under construction. Pacific Street in Lafayette. So there's a lot of units and projects kind of out there operational. There's some good data coming back on kind of the projects and where they stand. Next slide, please. So we always, when we look at a geothermal project, want to say, what are the initial feasibility items? A lot of times we get asked, like, what makes a site a good site versus a bad site? What things should we think about up front? And, what can you kind of defer to the design? So one of the things that we look at first is, in New York City, water tunnels. There's a no drill buffer, and then there's a really expensive buffer to drill in. So we typically want to make sure that you're outside that buffer. Proximity to MTA structures, we've had good success permitting both above and below ground subway tunnels, but it does add some cost and time. So we just want to see if you are in the TA, area of influence, and if that's going to get triggered. Depth to bedrock, you typically either want relatively deep bedrock, where bedrock is, deeper than.
I'm sorry, Zach, let me hop in real quick. I'm going to mute everybody, and then you can pop back on your mic. Okay, go for it.
Perfect. Yeah, so with bedrock, you either want relatively shallow bedrock, we typically say under 100 feet deep, or you want relatively deep bedrock, where bedrock is deeper than the depth of your boreholes. You'll find both in New York City, more in the Coney Island Rockaways, that's unconsolidated, where bedrock is 4, 5, 6, 800 feet deep. And then in Brooklyn, Manhattan, you might find bedrock 25 or 30 feet deep. And then the last thing that we look at on the ground is any environmental concerns. We are typically able to work through the environmental concerns, but there's, a few yards of soil per cuttings, per hole that needs to come out of the borehole that needs to get disposed of. And a lot of the drilling techniques utilize water that then need to get disposed of. Land area, what is the goals of the project? Is it to do 100% of heating, cooling, domestic hot water loads, or do we need a hybrid system? So we typically do a quick test fit and just see the geothermal potential of the site. And then for economics, what does the developer typically install versus what do we need for geothermal? How is cooling handled for tenant billing? And are there enough incentives to make the project economically viable? And then the last big thing is we'll run some block energy loads just to get kind of what the ground thermal balance is. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. So next slide, please. So some of the cost drivers, every project is a little bit unique. So we're seeing drilling, somewhere to $5,000 to $10,000 a ton of capacity need. Outer boroughs is more expensive than Midtown Manhattan. Depth to bedrock, which we reviewed. One of the interesting things that we're seeing in the market is small projects, which I would say, is the 25 to 75 holes. We're seeing lower cost per tons than the large projects. That's typically because of the construction schedules and need for multiple drill rigs. And there's only so many contractors and so many drill rigs out there. So as the market grows, we expect that to change. But that's one of the things that kind of doesn't make sense to me in the marketplace right now. Retrofit versus new construction. New construction projects are a little bit cheaper than retrofit projects. Complexity of the mechanical design system. If you keep it simple, vertical stack heat pumps per apartment or console units, those are relatively inexpensive systems to install. We see some designs that you look at and you say this will never get built or valued engineered at some point. So just, that. And then the other big thing that we're seeing is refrigerant choice for both domestic hot water systems, but also the heat pumps coming up. There's a refrigerant change out where the new refrigerants are slightly flammables as we move to the A2Ls. So a lot of our domestic hot water systems are CO2, which have some benefit for efficiencies, but they're more expensive and the technology is not as proven. So where's the developer's comfort level? Are you trading cost for efficiency? And, what does the service side look like? Next slide, please. So permitting, the nice thing about permitting is it's relatively well established. There's been a number of geothermal permits. I don't have this on the slide, but one of the things that I would say on permitting is hire an expediter that's done geothermal before, or at least knows what geothermal is. That will be extremely helpful. So there's DOB permits. Typically, they get filed as part of the mechanicals. If the bore fields are filed separately, it's typically an earthwork permit. You may need DOT permits, whether it's to cross a map street with a pipe for district systems, or if it's, to temporarily put a storage tank, a frac tank for drilling on the street, or to provide drilling access. DEP for the discharge of drilling, for water for the drilling, very similar to a site dewatering permit. You might need DEC or OER approval, depending on environmental concerns, and you might need transit authority approval. And then most permit happens in conjunction with the permitting for the new buildings. So it doesn't really add time frame for new building permits, but for retrofits, we typically say it'll take 2 to 4 months to permit, unless there's some major environmental concern that, changes that. Next slide, please. So I have a slide showing just kind of a futuristic district energy system, also known as thermal energy networks, community heat pumps. There's a lot of different names for these out there, but the idea is to kind of share energy between different structures. So you have a school or firehouse on the left, you have an office building, you have a multifamily building, and you're able to transfer energy between them and in turn reduce the size of the bore fields. So these are to come in New York City, both National Grid and Con Ed, under the Utility Thermal Energy Network and Jobs Act, are designing thermal energy systems, both geothermal and non-geothermal. Next slide, please. So we talk about modeling. So kind of the baseline to make sure that you have a robust geothermal system that will work is an 8760 energy model, which predicts how the building is going to operate on every hour out of the year. We look at coincidentals between when is domestic hot water generated, and when is heating and cooling used, how does the sun hit the north and the south side of the building. So it kind of looks at how the building peaks, not necessarily your connected load, but your diversified peak load, which in turn lets us size the bore field. Then there's hydraulic modeling that we're going to make sure that the piping system is robust and we're not going to create any problems. We never want to leak below a building. Most of New York City's boreholes are below the buildings. And then we run a transit analysis just to see how all the segments of pipe work and how the fluid flows through that. Next slide, please. And then last, we always get asked, how does geothermal compare in operational cost? And it's always kind of tough because every building's different. The amount of window to wall area changes. Are you building passive house? Are you not? So instead of putting up a per apartment metric, which is very project specific, we have a cost per million BTUs here. It's still very tough to compete against natural gas right now. So natural gas is typically your cheapest cost of operation, but then you can see you have ground source, air source, and then a straight electric resistance heat. We have the ability relatively quickly to, generate a cost estimate for a project if we're concerned about operational cost on that particular project, but this gives you a relatively good ratio of what to expect on a per project basis. And with that, I have a next slide and we'll hand it off to Dave.
Thank you so much, Dave. I will hand it over to Dave to get us into the next segment.
Yeah, great. Glad to be here today. Dave Hermantin from BrightCore. When I got notice of this, I felt like we're getting the old band back together because Sara and Zach and I, as they both mentioned, we worked together on the Beach Green Dunes 2 project, which seems just like yesterday, but it was about 7 years ago or so. And to see how far along this sort of nascent technology has come to help the state, meet decarbonization goals is really exciting for me. Since working together, I joined BrightCore about 5 years ago, and we're doing a couple of things as a geothermal developer, turnkey developer that are a bit interesting. We're bringing a lot of new things to the marketplace that hopefully will help increase the addressable market. Next slide. So yeah, New York City, people don't usually think of geothermal because it's New York City and it's, one of the most densely populated places. If it isn't in the country, it's, one of the most densely populated built up areas in the world. And usually you think of geothermal needing to have a big field next to it. Zach mentioned that he's, designing a lot of jobs these days where the geothermal bore fields, all these closed loops that make up these systems are located beneath the footprint of buildings. And that's possible for a number of reasons. Some of it has to do with the efficiencies that people are hitting now with buildings. We're seeing passive house buildings meet astronomically efficient levels of 1,000, 2,000 square feet being able to be served by 1 ton of cooling. So that's a big part of it. So for new construction, that often is a great solve. For retrofitting buildings, it's very difficult to even consider retrofitting existing buildings because of lack of access, lack of space around buildings. Next slide. So one of the things that BrightCore has done is we've gone overseas. We have done what I guess a lot of people in the United States have been thinking about, is looking at other areas around the world where ground source has been utilized more effectively than we have in the United States. And we identified that in Sweden, there's a lot of intellectual capital and a lot of knowledge that we could transfer to the United States. So a couple pictures here. We're drilling up at Cloisters in northern Manhattan, and we're using this little drill rig that's the size of a little drill rig, I guess. Small piece of machinery that about 10 feet long. We can actually fit this into real tight spaces. Next slide. Yeah, so you can see, the differences. At BrightCore, we run large rigs too. So the one on the right-hand side, it's about the size of a fire truck. The specialized drilling equipment that we've been using in New York recently is really a fraction of that size. Next slide. Here's some shots of us mobilizing into a building in Manhattan. This building is the Beresford building north of the Museum of Natural History. So it's not quite affordable housing. Actually, it is completely unaffordable housing, not affordable. But we just were fortunate that we had some stakeholders on a board, on the co-op board of that building, that were willing to allow us to come in there and drill in the basement of their 100-year-old building. So you kind of take what you can get, but it's demonstration of a technology that was developed in Scandinavia, and there are many buildings in Stockholm and other areas that have had retrofits with geothermal systems. Zach mentioned hybridization of systems, and that's where there's a huge opportunity as far as retrofitting, leveraging the efficiencies of ground source with air source when trying to address building loads or domestic hot water loads. Next slide. So what we're demonstrating at this building is it's a bit of a demand response type of configuration of ground source, that this building is cooling dominant. So what we're able to do with a hybridized system is operate air source off peak hours to preconditioned loops. And our modeling is showing a 18% reduction in peak load. So that might not seem like a great deal, but it was definitely of interest to NYSERDA and Con Edison. So it's a very specific use. But we're using this drill technology on some affordable housing projects, one in Manhattan and one in Queens, So it's interesting that, you know, there are projects that have been in development for some time that are willing to change course, and that's, I guess, you know, what's exciting to us, that, you know, this long building cycle, we're having some success. I guess probably even going back to Beach Green, you know, thinking of working with Zach, that the design for that building was, I think, in like, you know, 60% DDs with a boiler in it, and L&M was, I guess, so forward thinking that they were like, you know what? Yeah, people are saying that we can make a change and put a bore field in here and utilize these vertical stack heat pumps to, you know, to utilize geothermal for this project. So, in a similar manner, we're finding at BrightCore that there are a lot of developers out there in the LMI space that see putting geothermal in may help them in some ways get their project across the finish line. And maybe there's the possibility of getting some building of excellence money, or maybe there are creative people out there like Sara and others at L&M that have figured out how to leverage some of the federal tax credits in unique ways that can really help your project across the line to get built. And then as you're operating it, you get all these additional advantages. Next slide. So when we talk to our clients, at least, and probably similar to maybe a lot of the people that are on this call, you know, what do you do? Like when you're looking to consider using geothermal, the first thing is, you know, reach out to people with experience. You know, even though there are a lot of great engineering firms out there with super talented folks in New York City, not a lot of them have experience with geothermal. So, you know, I think there's some specialists, you know, that we know that we would, I guess, recommend. I'm being careful how I say this. I don't want to make it like a commercial, but yeah, you want to find out if people have experience taking these projects from start to finish, because there are a lot of sort of gaps along the way that, you know, the devils are in the details or within the gaps and the handoff points on projects if you haven't been through it before. For us, we are working on projects that are fairly large, but not for the multifamily space. We pretty much say that, you know, we're looking at buildings that are 50,000 square feet and up. We are finding that some buildings are so efficient, some of the passive house certified, or, you know, buildings that are going for passive house certification, even though they're 100,000 square feet, they're so efficient that they really don't need much geothermal. So we're kind of like, you know, not sure if they're too small for us now, which is kind of, I mean, I'm kind of happy about that, but for the marketplace. You know, what we're looking for, though, is these days with the very efficient buildings, we are looking for opportunities that have heating, cooling, and domestic hot water load. Because what we're finding is that the cooling is so dominant that it can require balancing on an annual basis. I probably could have said that a little more eloquently, but if you look at an energy model for a passive house building in our region, what we're seeing in New York and south of New York is that the cooling loads are definitely dominant. You know, so if you pair up just the heating and cooling, there may be a balance issue between the heating and cooling that domestic hot water, the addition of domestic hot water, can help balance out. We're also seeing that domestic hot water is so dominant, you know, when you look at it from an EUI perspective, that you may have the best operating outcome if you have the domestic hot water hybridized with air source and ground source. So, you know, there are things that need to be considered. Every building is different, you know, and that kind of goes back to the top, what you're looking for. You want to pull people into the conversation early on. You want to see that they have experience doing this. And that's probably how you're going to set yourself up for the best outcome. I think that's it. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much, Dave. And I'm now going to pass it over to our super special secret guest speaker that I didn't name in the beginning, Jen Leone, to talk about underwriting geothermal.
Thanks, you guys. That was awesome. It's super exciting from the HPD side and just from the sustainability world in general to see how quickly geothermal is evolving, especially in affordable housing. We all know affordable housing is leading the way in New York City and New York State on sustainability. Anyway, something we know will come up, or we think will come up in this presentation, is If you are doing regulated or HPD affordable housing, how on earth are you going to underwrite geothermal? We don't have M&O standards for geothermal, so what does one do? Like I said, we don't currently have a maintenance and operations standard for geothermal, but there is a way to deal with it on HPD projects. If anybody has, done an HPD project or underwritten a new construction project with us before, especially if it's high performance or passive house, you may have seen this worksheet. If you don't, we can show you where to find it. What we do allow is for buildings to do a custom underwriting of owner costs on a project. I'm not going to walk through all of the specifics, but so that everybody is familiar, it's a simple worksheet. It's available on our website, and the project can compare a projected energy cost for heating or possibly hot water for a geothermal project to our M&O standards. And then we underwrite a portion of the projected savings when compared to the typical budgeted energy savings from the M&O standard. So that is one way that we can figure out how to leverage the savings from geothermal. It's pretty straightforward, and the worksheet is really easy to use. And that's how you'd get over the hurdle of no geothermal M&O standard. We'd love to say that we have one coming soon. I don't think we have enough uptake for that yet, and we don't have enough data. And as I think Zach mentioned, every building is a little bit different, but this is a custom way to do it. Next slide. Another thing that HPD recently has started publishing are utility allowances for electric heating. Now, we don't have, or nor do we expect, tenant paid geothermal heating. What we do have are the standard utility allowances for underwriting HPD projects, right? The standard utility allowance assumes tenants pay for their own cooling. We know that there are situations with geothermal where that becomes a little bit weird, right? Some of the heating may end up on the tenant's bill, some of the cooling, depending on how the in-unit equipment is set up. What we do have is a new-ish in 2023 apartment electric allowance that excludes air conditioning. And this allows the building owner to take on the cooling costs, right? And that is a really simple and straightforward way to not deal with the split billing issue that is so typical and so challenging in heat pump projects. So it's not perfect, but it is a way to start thinking about how geothermal can be underwritten. And that's the last thing we want to be a barrier in supporting this equipment. I'm not going to say too much more. I think people are much more interested in how to get geothermal on their projects. But before I turn over the floor to the experts and the questions, just letting everybody know that HPD has an underwriting electric and high performance buildings webpage, and that's where you can find these tools and tables and information about our policies and all of our standards. So with that, I'll pass it back to Jasmine to coordinate the FAQ. And please ask questions. It's a great opportunity to find out more from the experts.
And really quickly, before I open up the floor to questions, just some interesting and exciting things that are happening here at HPD. We are releasing and updating our website materials. So as Jen mentioned, our web pages has all of the links, all of the information that you can need. So we're consistently updating it. So be sure to really check out our website for those links. We do have 2 upcoming trainings, one for our preservation design guidelines for external partners. That's happening on February 5th at 12 p.m. via Teams. So you might want to jot that down. And we also have a solar training coming up on February 14th called We Love Solar. It is at 1 p.m. and you can register via Zoom. Last but not least, if you have any projects in the pipeline or any projects in mind that you want to pass through HPD, get your design consultation scheduled. You can find out more information about that also on our webpage for new construction as well as preservation projects. And on the right-hand side, I have our emails, our general email mailboxes that you can reach out to if you have any further questions. So now with that, I will open the floor up to questions, which we have a few hands already. So I will ask Samuel to please unmute and ask your question.
Hey, hey everyone, this is Sam Birnbaum from Settlement Housing Fund. Zach and Sarah, nice to talk to you here. Sarah, this is a question probably for you. Can you just talk through a bit of the details on the syndication of the ITCs? Did you find that pricing was equivalent across LIHTCs and the ITCs? Do you recommend that that developers work with syndicators that have experience with geothermal? Just any insight you can share on the syndication aspect would be very helpful.
Sure. I don't know how helpful my opening statement is going to be, but it depends. Depending on the project and your team, and the market is really going to drive pricing. I would say, from a tax credit investment standpoint, usually big picture, we package them or try to package them with the LIHTC credits as well. Pricing isn't necessarily the same. Like I said, it really does depend on the investor and the current New York City market at the time and what their portfolio is looking like for the year and their investment. Obviously, we try to push quite hard on the ITCs and also from an ESG standpoint to get maximum pricing. I think what you're also going to see, which helps with city and state and other public resources, is the expansion of the ITC credit and all of these different boosts that you get do help basically raise extra basis, so to speak, which is very, very helpful, at least on the New York City front. So I think it really does depend, but generally speaking, we try to package them together.
Great. And I'm sorry, just a quick follow-up. Do you find that there are idiosyncrasies about ITCs and their syndication that require or make it easier to work with a syndicator that has experience directly with them? Or, have you worked with first-time syndicators of ITCs and it's all been fine?
I've done both. I think, right now we're in a climate with the new ITCs where everybody's doing this for the first time and you're getting guidance from Treasury happening in real time. So I think we're all in a similar boat that we're trying to, understand what the IRS is looking for and what Treasury is looking for. Obviously recommending working with tax counsel and members of your team who are familiar with ITCs, whether it was in their old permutation or not. I think one of the first times we did this, there was a little bit of an education, especially as it related to the geo. I think ITCs were pretty ubiquitous in the market from a solar perspective, but not necessarily from a geo perspective, at least in the earlier versions. But I think it does help, but the caveat is the program is new and we're all kind of muddling through it at this point.
Right. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Sure.
And really quickly, for those of us that may not know, can you tell us what ITCs stand for?
Investment tax credits.
Thank you. Next question is from Grayson. So if you could unmute yourself, please feel free and ask your question.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for the presentation. Grayson Jordan, Paul Castrucci Architects. I have two questions and I'm going to ask them quickly. First is it's a little unclear about when it's good. It probably was clear in the presentation, but it's confused in my head. What is the bedrock condition we're looking for? Is it really low below ground or closer to ground? That's one. And the second is kind of a two-part question. What's the lifespan of the below ground equipment, we'll call it, or the tunnels? And what kind of maintenance issues could we expect from below ground? And should you have a backup plan in case something goes wrong below ground? Thanks.
Yeah, so Grayson, we typically want, bedrock that's close to the surface. So, and we typically define that as about 100 feet below grade that you're going to be drilling at. So if bedrock's 130 feet, but you're excavating 30 feet for a basement or something like that, you're going to drill post excavation, then it would be 100 feet. Or you want it to be relatively deep, so you want it to be 500, 600, 700 feet below, the current, surface grade. And where your loops would be, if bedrock is at 450 feet, maybe you can drill 400-foot loops on that site. It's extremely expensive to set, a lot of surface casing. So we don't want to have to set 300 feet of surface casing to then drill, another 200 feet. We can and we have done it on projects, but it's not the most cost effective. And then your second part of your question, the lifespan, which is, the pipe itself has a 50 or 55-year warranty, depending which manufacturer you buy it from. Lifespan, depending on who you ask, is somewhere between 100 and 200 years. So we expect the pipe to outlast most of the buildings, is the current thinking.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Van. So if you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, everyone. It's a great presentation. This is Van Tao from Kudiskin Spark. That I guess I have to join the 101 to ask Zach some pretty 101 questions, I guess. So the first question, I have two questions, actually, original three, but the second one's already being answered. The first one is, Zach, you have mentioned, putting implications about this closed loop geothermal system. And I was always wondering, what's the other type of system, like open loop? And I was just kind of confused and also curious, what's the difference and how many different type of geothermal systems are, and what is the best put in multifamily project? The second question will be kind of built on that maintenance question that was asked earlier. I'm kind of curious about the, what is that project? The Arvin East project. I'm curious that what is the benefit of having a master loop, in terms of efficiency? And also, I thought that usually when you have a, almost like mechanical system, you have a longer kind of distribution. Usually you become less efficient in just general form of the energy goes. And so I'm just curious, how that's operating and what's the pro and con, when you kind of type into the master system. Thank you.
All right. So the first question, different types of geothermal systems. There's mainly two types that you'll see on large scale projects, open loop and closed loop. And open loops take some different types of permutations. Standing column well is one of them, where you'll drill 1,000, 1,500-foot hole in the bedrock and use the column of water in the bedrock and kind of circulate it through. The main difference between open loop and closed loop systems is open loop systems use the groundwater, where closed loop systems recirculate water through them. So closed loop systems are very much install, set, and forget. They require very little maintenance. Once they're installed, they kind of just run themselves, which is one of the reasons that we advocate for them. Where an open loop system, you have a well pump in the ground, you need to figure out the maintenance of it, you need to figure out the minerals, you need to figure out your water quality, you need to figure out if water quality is good now and if it changes. So there's a lot more design considerations. For large scale projects, it sometimes is the correct choice. But for small projects, it typically doesn't make economic sense. And then you have increased O&M. And then there's also energy piles where you can put the ground loops in the foundation system. Would be kind of the additional, another type of system that we see. And then for maintenance, so there's a circulating fluid, there's a little bit of water treatment associated with it. You have circulator pumps that require a standard pump maintenance. You're going to have seals that need to get replaced. They're going to need to get aligned every so often. There's going to be VFDs on them that need to get maintained. But besides that, and then you have your in-unit heat pump maintenance. But besides that, that's really the extent of the maintenance on the geothermal system. We would advocate some sort of trend monitoring to be put on the systems, whether formal BMS or just like an Onacon data logger. So we can log in and see how the system is performing versus expected, just so we can, help flag an issue before it becomes a system is down issue. But most of the systems are set and forget, which is really nice.
Awesome. Thank you. I hope that answers your question, Vincent. Oh, sorry, not Vincent. Next up, we have Vincent.
Vincent Favada from Lantern Organization. So we already have an existing geothermal system at one of our locations in the Bronx. And we're finding that it is, even just to get some industry players out there just to take a look at our system and help us troubleshoot some of the issues. We're getting these wildly expensive proposals. Does HPD have any partners that they can maybe kind of connect us with so that we can get somebody to come out and look at our system that we feel like we're continuing to have issues with, and somebody that's at least fairly priced?
I would have to say no. I don't think we have enough geothermal and enough experience as an agency to have a pool of geothermal maintenance contractors. The folks on this call might have some recommendations, though.
Okay, yeah, no, we know. I mean, I know Zach has been out to the building, ironically enough. I haven't met Zach, but we exchanged emails previously. And, my team reached out to the previous installer, and the price that came back just to go and review the system for us is, we were kind of floored as a team. So we're looking for any additional assistance in this area.
You can reach out to me. My email is dave.hermantin@BrightCore Energy. It's a short email. I might be able to refer you to a couple contractors that have expertise in geo. They're not the cheapest guys, but they're good guys.
Which is what we keep finding, right? So this is kind of where we're, we want to put the geothermal in. We want to achieve sustainability targets, though, once the system's in, it's quite expensive to maintain, as I'm sure everyone's aware. So we're just kind of running into some roadblocks here. So it's Dave Hermantin.
Yeah, HERMANTIN. Actually, I could put it in the chat.
Awesome.
Yeah, at BrightCore Energy.
You.
Thanks.
Thank you, Vincent and Dave. Next, we have George.
Hi, everyone. So my question is around, I believe in about 2 years ago or 3 years ago, Governor Hochul passed a bill, I guess, to it requires any work that's, I guess, geothermal and or renewable energy related that exceeds 1 megawatt of power generated, I guess that's for the year, to be done at prevailing wage, and I believe that's the case. Have you guys come across this matter before, and are there sort of creative workarounds to not have to do the work at a prevailing wage rates?
So it's not Governor Hochul. It's the Federal Inflation Reduction Act that's at the 1 megawatt threshold.
Okay.
Nonetheless, I spend a lot of time talking about what is a one megawatt. These feel, philosophy questions that you never thought you would have. Sara and I have traded more text about this than I can count. So the IRS, issued guidance right before Thanksgiving, and they had comments due a week or two ago about what is 1 megawatt. I think they issued it during that time frame so people would ignore it. Personally, nothing like catching both holidays in a 45-day comment period.
Mm-hmm.
But nonetheless, they define 1 megawatt as 284 tons. And there's some ambiguity about the definition. Around, what is included and not. One of the things that they did define is it's the dominant load. which helps us out in the guidance. So if you have 250 tons of heating, but 250 tons of cooling, but 40 tons of heating only, the latest guidance that we've seen shows that, that wouldn't exceed 1 megawatt. They're not additive. So so you can look at it as dominant peak or dominant cooling load, which is nice. So because we had a lot of projects that domestic hot water put us over the threshold cap. And then we put in as both industry, I wear a few hats. One is the vice president of the New York Trade Association, and then a group of us on the national level got together to put in comments, where we're pulling for an energy model approach as well, and or, a BTU meter to determine that the system never exchanged more than 1 megawatt. You get somewhere between 30 and 100% diversification on these buildings. So you might be able to connect 500-600 tons and still stay below that 284 ton threshold. Partially because when you build passive house buildings, the smallest heat pump they make is still bigger than your your apartment load.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot of gaps. I'm happy to be a resource if you have specific questions. There's a lot of like fact specific stuff. And it also depends on kind of your tax council and the syndicator and how you're selling it, and what their appetite is, and exactly how do they view 1 megawatt, because I can view it one way, you can view it another way, Sarah and Dave can all view it other ways, and the syndicator views it a completely different way, and that's ultimately what you need to follow.
Got it. Thank you.
And last, we have a question from Jason. So Jason, if you can unmute yourself, please feel free to. And if anybody else has any questions, please do raise your hand.
Hey, Zach, Jason Hertz here, Endurance Energy. Just a quick question. The Arvern projects and the New York City DOB, and how does the DOB handle like TR forms, any of the special inspection related stuff right now for closed loop or anything related to geothermal? Just curious how that's working right now.
So not necessarily Arvern Pacific, just kind of all.
Yeah, just New York City specific.
Yeah, just New York City Pacific. So it goes under mechanical systems, and I think it's 1201 is a section of mechanical code. But I can email it to you after this if you don't have it. Basically, it says that you need to do a pressure test and then you need to do a flow test. And I'm going to screw up the threshold. You either need to be within, I think it's 10% of the, expected pressure drop. So there's a flow test requirement and a pressure test requirement. It's witnessed by the special inspector. And then there's a final sign off by the EOR, typically.
Got it. No, thank you. Thank you for the reference.
We have a question from Manuel, is how I would pronounce it. So sorry if I did pronounce it wrong. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, hello? That was good. Thank you, Manuel. That's fine. Thank you for that. So now, a simple question. Is there any losses in terms of water leakage for the in-ground pipes? And if so, how much is it? How is the tolerance? And common problems found during installation. Can you expand upon that? Thank you.
I would say that, it's a closed loop system. So if we have a leak, we have a problem. We typically say that we want, several, pressure tests at various phases. So the loops come under pressure. If they're not under pressure, throw it away. After it's installed, pressure tested. And then after it's at the manifold, keep it under pressure. Because things do get hid in its plastic pipe that most contractors are not used to working with underground. But there shouldn't be any losses kind of the finished system. And we want to avoid leaks in the installation process.
And any issues during installation or problems usually encountered during installation?
I mean, look, I think we all have things that have gone unexpected in construction. The biggest thing is schedule mitigation. When we drill geothermal under a building, exactly how you phase it can have a big impact. As Sarah's mentioned, it ranges from a few weeks of schedule impacts, and we've had it be several plus months on other projects, to the point that it can affect critical path completion. And just, choosing a competent drilling partner, is the other big thing. We have projects that it's, a company's first time trying to drill in New York City. They're not familiar with the geology, plus they're not familiar with working in New York City. So it takes them a long time to get up to speed. They ultimately do a great job, but, I think there are growing pains of the industry right now. Someone told me there were going to be 140 people on this call. I would have told you no way. So, the industry has, grown significantly in the last, 6 months, last 5 years. So I suspect a lot of the issues will resolve themselves, with subcontractor networks over a short period of time.
Thank you. And we do have some questions in the chat that I'd like to address. So this one is addressed to you, Dave. Can you describe more specifics as to what pre-charging the ground loop means?
Yeah, I guess if you picture this system that is circulating condenser water all year long, and when I say condenser water, it's for heating and cooling off the heat pump. So there is an annual fluctuation of temperature that you start on day one, it's starting at ambient ground temperature. So if you picture you're starting on January 1st, what happens is you're pulling heat out of the ground. That 55 degrees is going to drop down through the heating season. And then once you get into the cooling season, it starts to rise up. And what happens is when you get into August, that the temperature is reaching its peak, and that's that circulated water. So with the air source system, what we can do is operate it during off-peak hours, like overnight hours, when the outside air is the coolest and you get the most efficiency out of the air source heat pump. So we're able to leverage getting a heat pump that's operating with 70-degree outside air temperature on a hot night, and you can precondition the loop. So you're using the energy from the air source heat pump to cool the loop fluid down a little bit. So that's what we refer to when we're saying we're preconditioning or pre-charging the loop for the next upcoming day's heat event. So when it's 95 degrees the next day, our loop temperature may be about 70 degrees as opposed to 80 degrees. Get efficiency from that.
Thank you, Dave. And I hope that answers your question, Scott, if you're still here. We have another question, and this is to anyone who's open to answering it. How does geothermal do cooling? The heat provides electricity to AC units, ?
Yeah, so the heat pumps are typically reversible. They have a reversing valve in them. So the same heat pump just flips the mode of operation and can put out hot air or cold air, kind of from the same box. That's mostly what you're going to see in a multifamily building.
Thank you. And the last question we have in the chat, and also open to anyone. How should sea level rise / flood risk be taken into account when considering geothermal in coastal areas?
I guess I'll take this one too. We have a number of projects in flood zones. We've gone through it with DOB, where we have projects where they made us use polyethylene ball valves, and anything that lives below DFE needs to be, able to get completely submerged without, any flood issues. From a ground performance perspective, the relatively high water table is good, and especially if it's tidal, because it'll pull away a lot of the excess heat as you have a lot of groundwater movement. So it's actually a good application for geothermal when you're in that area. But just with anything else, you want to make sure you're above DFE and figure out the placement of the mechanical components that you're high enough up.
Thank you. Awesome. And with that, we are finished with questions unless anybody else has any last minute burning questions to ask. I would like to thank you all again for joining us, as well as thank our presenters and speakers for giving us such an in-depth and knowledgeable presentation on geothermal, what it looks like in New York City, but also how can you get started with geothermal in New York. I urge you, this presenters, to please drop your email in the chat so that people have a way to reach out and ask any further questions that they may have been shy to ask here today. And with that, have a great one. Bye.
Everyone, thanks.
Everyone, thank you.
Thanks, presenters.
Thank you.